All right, I always like to end the semester with some parting thoughts to my students, and I've titled this presentation, What Will You Do with What You Have Been Given? First, since we're in the middle of an epidemic with COVID-19, let's talk a little bit about that. If you haven't seen this before, this is a map of COVID cases from Johns Hopkins University of Medicine. And you can see different versions of cumulative confirmed cases or active cases or incidence rate. And this really does portray testing rate, different ways of viewing data. In fact, I want to talk a little about this curve over here on the right, lower right. And you'll see that we've got this increasing rate of confirmed cases. Now, remember, all data has uncertainty with it. All of it has bias and issues with it. But this does look pretty bad, right? These cases are increasing. Now, the thing is, if you look at daily cases, this is actually the number of reported cases. So we can see that actually, globally, the cases are actually flat now. So it's not decreasing, maybe a little bit if we're a little bit hopeful. We're, of course, looking for this to go down over time, and then the epidemic will end eventually. But this is, to me, a better way of looking at it. Again, remembering these are daily cases, so not on ongoing cases. We take a look at the U.S. Similar trend, a little bit cleaner. For some reason, they don't have new. They just have deaths, which, of course, is also increasing. But this is why we want to take a look at data in different ways. We also want to think about how we portray it. I continue to go to the CDC as my favorite place to get information because the media has been really bad at portraying what's going on. And if we look at new cases by day, well, it's flat. It's been flat for a while. Again, maybe going down. That might be hopeful thinking, wishful thinking, but yeah, definitely flat. So what this means is that we're having the same number of new cases each day. That's it. So we're still waiting for this to come down, and some states are tailing off, but not all. Some are still going up. So yeah, we need this to tail off, and then we'll see that the epidemic is going away. Very important in how you portray the data. Especially because there's a lot of misinformation out there now. This is one of my favorites, that viruses cannot travel on radio waves or mobile networks. So we have viruses that are in electronic systems and networks, and we talk about those. But of course, those are electronic viruses. They are not COVID. They are not human or animal viruses. They're electronics. They're a completely different thing. And of course, this was just the funniest one that I found on the World Health Organization's website because they had to combat the misinformation. And I highly recommend avoiding the misinformation. And this is a real problem now with media, especially electronic media, that anyone can post whatever they want. During COVID, there has been an escalating number of lawsuits against those folks because they've done damage. And I expect there to be the same kind of standards and laws emerging to control electronic media and especially the news as there was in the past with paper. And so that will get better and more authoritative over time. We'll see. All right, so about COVID. So this is my information that I've gathered off of looking on the web, different sources. I try to stay with good sources. I'm not an epidemiologist, but important to know this is a group of viruses that infect and multiply in the respiratory tissues. That includes the flu. So the COVID is related to the flu, different virus, but still a respiratory virus. The viruses are proteins and will have proteins in them. Fundamentally, inside of a protein is a cell, is a protein that takes over cells to reproduce, kind of hijacks them. And these are close-up electron scanning photographs of actually COVID. And you can see the little crowns, which gives it its name, corona for crown. And then these are the viruses replicating in the lungs. Typically, these have a fatty coat around them that allows them to survive outside of the lungs for a short period of time because otherwise they desiccate and dry up. Some symptoms of any virus and lots of diseases are actually caused by our immune system. So the fever is our body fighting it. The cough is our body trying to expel it and trying to be able to clear the lungs to be able to breathe. So remember, that's not always the virus. And the bottom line is, if our immune system beats the virus, we live. Otherwise, we die. Now, we have evolved with viruses. In fact, we're the survivors of thousands of virus attacks over time. This is part of human history, part of animal history on this planet. Viruses and animals evolved together. And they evolved with us to adapt and survive, like the common cold, which comes every year. It mutates every year. It comes in and infects us again, but it doesn't kill too many people. That's part of its evolution, is that it can survive. Now, COVID-19. So what works with COVID-19? Social distancing, washing with alcohol, that breaks down the lipid layer so the virus dries out. Covering your mouth and nose so that people aren't sneezing and coughing the virus particles onto other people directly. Not touching your mouth and nose and then touching someone else that then touches their mouth or nose, because it can transmit. Things like kissing, of course, would transmit it immediately. Not sneezing on other people. And maybe immunization. Now, the problem with this type of virus is they mutate, and they mutate about once a year. So immunizations only work on the one that they developed it for, and it takes time, a lot of energy and money to develop immunization. So that's going to be hard. They're working on it, but it's going to be hard. I've also heard colleagues say they can't wait for this to be over so things get back to normal. Well, we get in a lot of trouble by thinking short term and narrow-minded. And this is apparently a cultural thing with Western culture. Some other cultures think longer term. One of my favorite quotes is actually from an old Western where Paul Newman's character said, a man fell out of a 10-story building. People on each floor heard him say, "So good so far." And that was a Magnificent Seven, by the way. And that seems to be the attitude that we have. It's like, oh, yeah, we're fine, we're fine, we're fine. Oh, a problem might be coming. But until it really hits us in the face, we don't do much about it. And we've got these larger and larger problems that are coming, but their impacts are further in the future, at least we think they are. And this is going to include new diseases, water shortages, climate change, pollution, peak oil. All of these problems are going to hit us, and we really aren't doing a lot or enough to adapt to them. And the culture that most of us grew up in prioritizes personal wealth and fame and instant gratification. I grew up hearing people say the phrase, "He who dies with the most toys wins." We measure the success of our children largely based on their position or how much money they make. We measure our country's success with the gross national product, or GMP. That's the primary measure. And publicly traded companies report profit every 3 months. If they're not making a profit, their stock goes down, and they can only handle that for so long before people sell their stock, and then someone can buy them up and potentially part them out. So this gives us a really short-term focus. Now, at the same time, we are great at pulling together and solving problems when they are immediate and obvious, when they hit us in the face. World War II was largely ignored. The increasing conflict in the world, totalitarian governments taking over, that was ignored by the United States until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That then pulled us together. Boom, we went off and engaged not only against the Japanese, but also against the Axis powers in Europe, Germany and Italy, specifically. COVID-19, similarly, we've been warned about diseases from the CDC and the World Health Organization for decades, but when COVID-19 was at our door, we responded, we did what needed to be done. Now, the problem is viruses are increasing, and they're increasing because of increased interaction between animals and humans, particularly in industrialized farms, forestries, and open markets. Forestry because we're cutting down old growth traditional forests that have animals in them that are then being exposed to humans. Things like Ebola are then coming out of those forests, out of the monkeys in those forests, and jumping to humans. Open markets, which is what they believe happened with COVID. Lack of sanitation and good health, particularly in non-industrialized countries or industrializing countries. Density of human beings, the denser we are, the more viruses and other diseases are going to spread. That's why social distancing works. Rapid travel, moving around, takes those diseases and carries them around. Again, with COVID, we went into a quarantine, stopped travel. Lack of emergency response personnel, facilities, and equipment. We've been warned about this, and sure enough, with COVID, big focus was on giving our medical industry the time to be able to adapt by lowering the curve, fewer patients over time. We've been warned about this for decades. So what's going to happen next? Well, if we take a look at history, just looking at viruses, we can see there's really been a whole series of viruses. They come in these different time periods. These are only a few of the big ones, but you can see back to the Black Death, 200 million people died. Smallpox, 56 million. Spanish flu, last century, about this time, 100 years ago, 40 to 50 million. HIV and AIDS took longer, but has killed 25 to 35 million people. And then there's COVID down at the bottom. So there's going to be more. Now, the interesting part is we've done things that not only will help with COVID, but all the things we've done, social distancing and all of that, will help with other diseases, especially viruses like the flu. They will go down in incidence. Then life will return to normal, COVID will go away, and then we'll have another pandemic. Okay, that's sort of the path we're on. We don't have to be, but that seems to be the path we're on. Now, the way these types of viruses work is there are literally over 1 million of these viruses operating in the animal kingdom, and they move around through the animal kingdom. They also mutate, and then somehow in contact with humans, they can move into humans. They can actually move back and forth and mutate in different ways. And then with human-to-human transmission, they increase, and then we spread them around the world with global transportation. So here's the one that I worry about. Here's the one that actually I think could be far worse than COVID. HIV/AIDS had an 80% death rate. And it had a very long incubation period. In other words, people who got HIV/AIDS could have the disease and infect other people without showing symptoms. And that could happen for years. So people were going around infecting other people for years before we even discovered and identified the disease. Then they started dying in large numbers. It was transmitted through blood-to-blood contact, which is difficult, right? It's not like sneezing on someone. It typically was done through sexual behavior, sexual intercourse, or transfusions. It also happened there. So blood to blood. If it went airborne, if AIDS had gone airborne, the entire human population, most of us, could have been infected before it was discovered. Then 80% of us would have died out. Probably more than that, because imagine if 80% of the human population died out, it would destroy our infrastructure. And this is a picture from Chernobyl. It's sort of our example of infrastructure, human infrastructure, just being humans removed from it and watching it now decay. So that's actually what I worry about. Now, the other one is there's lots of pathogens. There's not just viruses. There's also prions, which are simply pieces of twisted DNA. And these persist in the environment, which is kind of scary. Again, there's a whole range of viruses. And then there's bacteria, there's fungus, there's protozoans, and then there's parasites. Now, these are in increasing level of complexity, from very simple just strands of protein all the way through to animals, worms and things. But there's a whole variety of these pathogens. This chart shows a whole variety of different diseases, and it shows how contagious they are along the horizontal axis, and then how deadly they are on the vertical axis. And we have some extreme ones up here. Rabies. Well, you can see why people are so worried about rabies. It's one of the most contagious and deadly diseases on the planet. So a lot of concern if someone has rabies. Here's HIV and AIDS, one of the worst. Dengue fever, bubonic plague, smallpox, which, by the way, apparently has been eliminated over the entire planet, which is just amazing. Polio, bubonic plague, one of the worst viruses. And here's COVID-19. So not the worst, but bad. There's Spanish flu, okay, similar in what it did. But the other thing to take into account is that there's just a huge number, right? There's a huge number of different diseases. Um, and we need to keep perspective on this if we're going to prevent real outbreaks. Now, the other one that concerns me is, as I said, we have other issues going on around the world, and we tend to ignore these long-term issues. And we do that both when they're out in the future, but also when they're right in front of us and they're happening every day. On this chart, I've put the causes of death from the CDC in the United States for the year 2018. So that's for the whole year. And then I added COVID up until the latest data that I had. So 1/3 of the year. And there it is. Okay. In other words, a tiny number of people have died from COVID-19 versus just the flu in 2018. And of course, the flu is not a single virus, it's actually a group of them. Okay, COVID is a single one, but still a huge number of people. And then you look at cancer and heart disease. Well, why haven't we had the kind of public and governmental response for heart disease and cancer if they are killing this many people compared to COVID? And I agree with what we did with COVID. I think we took the right steps. Why aren't we taking similar steps for heart disease and for cancer? Now, cancer, there's a lot of research going on, but we're not preventing it as effectively as we could be by eliminating a lot of the chemicals and the foods that are causing cancer and increasing it. Same thing with heart disease, especially. We know that exercise and diet are two of the biggest drivers in heart disease. Those are things that, imagine if we put the same kind of effort we put into COVID, if we put that into heart disease, and how we could crank these numbers down. And of course, these are people that die. These aren't people that get sick in the case of heart disease, heart attacks and related diseases. Yeah, why not? Well, so what do we need to do? Well, my favorite is adapted from a Hawaiian indigenous saying that's perpetual well-being for all. If we could focus on everyone on the planet having well-being for perpetuity, for all time, we would need to improve sanitation, clean water, abundant food. One that's really controversial and people don't talk enough about, in my opinion, is lowering birth rates. The fewer people we have, the less disease we're going to have, but also the more water and food and other resources we're going to have. We need increased health services globally. The other issues we're going to get into are peak oil. When we run out of oil, we are going to shift large quantities of corn to ethanol production, which is going to take a huge amount of food out of the global food system, and that's going to cause a lot of people to starve. I worry about that. Climate change, everyone hears about it. We're still driving cars, we're still cranking out oil, and the climate's still changing because of it. And I believe it's the World Health Organization estimates 250,000 people will be dying of climate change in the near future. People are losing their farms, their land is being washed away. They're dealing with tsunamis and floods that they've never had to deal with before. It's happening now. Pollution is still a huge problem. Overfishing, we're losing our fishing resources, and then scarcity of fertilizer. I believe it's potassium that we're going to run out of in the near future, one of the most important ones. Then, what are the solutions? Well, the frustrating part is the solutions are things we've heard about: reduce, reuse, recycle, research, education, and services, focus on renewable energy, and cleaning up our planet. I've been around for a while. These are all things that we talked about when I was young, when I was in my 20s. We haven't made as much progress as I would have hoped, and all of these things will help us get to perpetual well-being for everybody. What works? Education, regulation, government regulation works, especially in issues like clean water and pollution, and infrastructure investment. If we're going to roll from our largely fossil fuel-based energy system over to renewable energy, we're going to need huge infrastructure investment, which will also actually create jobs. What you can do, well, this is a modeling class, so we can create models and simulations that provide compelling evidence to improve decision makers. And we can do this at local and global scales, right? You can do it for a reach of a river to look at salmon restoration, or how to better manage an area of forest. And your chance of having an impact at those small extents are, of course, much greater, right? You may end up managing a piece of land or a marine protected area, and so you can have a lot of impact in that small area, which is great. Globally having impact is harder, but it's still important. Also, try and see these issues from all perspectives so we don't put one group at a disadvantage over another one. Indigenous people, low-income folks tend to end up getting impacted negatively by a lot of these decisions. And then looking far into the future as you can and try and help others do the same. A lot of the decisions we're making today are going to have negative impacts down the road, not necessarily for us, maybe even for our children, but for our grandchildren and other folks in the future. In my opinion, where do we get the resources from this? Largely from the military. We're spending huge amounts of money on a military that I'm not sure why we need it. It's over $700 billion more if you include all of the interest on the loans and the other impacts that are coming from the military. It's just this incredible quantity of money, and some of that is being used for building things like $6 billion aircraft carriers, one of which was taken out by a Swedish submarine that cost, I believe, $200 million. These are anachronistic, outdated technologies that were based on World War II mentality. We don't need these huge aircraft anymore. We need smaller ones. We need smaller, more mobile military to deal with the issues that we have today. So that's where I would shift the money, a portion of the military going over to those other things. And then take a look at discretionary spending. We do spend a fair amount of money on things like human services and education, but we could spend a lot more. Veterans Affairs is very expensive. The more people we have in the military, the more we're going to have to spend on veteran affairs. So I want to spend that money to support our vets, but we need to have fewer people in the service so we don't have as big a hit from that in the future. And then you can see where else the money is spent. Thank you.